Okay, well then we're gonna go ahead and get started. As always, you can find the class slides and everything you absolutely need in our Google Drive. And then here's just the link to the Google Drive in general. This has pretty much everything you need. Okay. And for today, we're going to be using mostly Replit, I think, because I haven't touched Replit in a while with y'all, and I don't want you to forget how it works. But if you prefer to use Google Colab, that is perfectly fine. You can use the tool of your choice. Okay, so firstly, I would like to review the task that we had from last week. So here is last week's assignment. And we're going to go through this step by step. I did get several submissions for this, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for sending me your assignments. And I think mostly people did really well on this. So let's go ahead and review it quickly. And if you have any questions, of course, please put those in the chat as always, and or raise your hand and I can call on you. So let's go ahead and look at this. So first we've got write Python code that prints every number less than 25 using for loops. All right. And I'm going to make use of some comments. And for me, I actually turned off the AI assistant because it was getting on my nerves. If you click on this little AI button, it gives you the option to enable or disable. If you like to have it on, that's totally fine. But if it's distracting to you or not helping you learn, then I would recommend turning it off. But that's just for me while I'm teaching. Okay, so first of all, write Python code that prints every number less than 25 using for loops. All right, so to do this, we're going to start with our for loop. And remember that syntax is for I in range. And now it says every number less than 25. Okay, so I'm going to start at 0, go to 25. Remember, it will stop before this number, so it'll actually go 0 to 24. Don't forget your colon here. For I in range 0 to 25, then I can say print I. So this is a nice little loop here that will print every number less than 25 for us. So now if I hit run, and sure enough, it goes 0 to 24. All right, now the bonus, write code that does the above, but also prints out this number is divisible by 7 after a number divisible by 7. So in this case, what I'm going to do is just add a little if statement after this. So we're printing the number still, and I'm going to say if I, remember modulo, the percent sign modulo is how we are saying if this is divisible, this is divisibility. So if I mod 7 is equal to 0, that means that there's 0 remainder when you divide I by 7. Then we're also going to print this number is divisible by 7. All right, and now if we run this, oh, it does it for 0 as well. That's fine. And then it has 7, then this number is divisible by 7. 14, this number is divisible by 7. And so you can see this is doing exactly what we want. All right. Now for the extra, write Python code that does all of the above, but allow a user to enter the maximum number to count down from. So whenever you see allow a user to enter whatever, you need to be thinking the input function. You need to be thinking assign a variable using the input function. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have some, let's say max value equals, I'm going to make that an integer, input, enter a maximum value. And now I need to change my for loop. So instead of for I in range 0 to 25, we're replacing this with whatever max value our user has entered. Remember, it needs to be an integer. So if you didn't convert it to an integer up here, make sure you convert it to an integer here. So now we have max value. And now our program will allow us to, here, let me clear this output, stop and clear the output. Now when I run this, it's going to say enter a maximum value. I'm going to say 15. When I press enter, it will do everything that we've had it do before. And then but use the number that we prefer instead. All right, so are there any questions about this assignment? And I'm gonna take a screenshot of it so that you can all see the solution if you would like to review it later. Any questions at all? All right. Well, then let's go ahead and talk about a quick review. So we looked at this, and so I'm gonna need your participation in the chat. I feel like I'm on a stream. Hi, chat. Gonna need your participation here. So we did this one last time, but just as a refresher, we're looking at this code, and I am asking you, if we just run this code, what is going to happen? What is going to happen if I run this code? So we did this one last time, so it should be quick. This is a warm-up. This is a warm-up. All right, so what will happen if we run this code? Go ahead and put in the chat. First guess in, amazing. All right, everyone, go ahead and put in the chat what will happen if we run this. So we've got some questions about errors, and I'm going to go ahead and address that. There's no error because nothing's wrong with this code. Nothing's wrong with the code. X is equal to 0, and now we have a while loop that says while x is greater than 0. What does a while loop do if it doesn't ever meet this condition? Right, nothing. It's just going to skip. It's just going to say, okay, not going to do that. And that's fine. So no error. Yep. It's just gonna go. Amazing. So nothing happens here. X equal to 0 while x is greater than 0. Nope, nothing's gonna happen. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, next one. What happens here? We have x equals 9 while x is less than 10, print x is less than 10. And then print the loop has ended. What prints here? You can just write out what prints to the console. What prints to the console? Not asking about errors, what prints to the console? Awesome, I'm loving these answers. I'll give you a couple more seconds to look over it. It's not counting. There's no counting going on here. All right, and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Amazing. Okay, I love this. We got some mixed answers. Not all of them were correct, but most of them were on the right track. So let's look at this step by step. So first one here, we have x equals 9. All right, now our while loop says while x is less than 10. 9 is less than 10, so we're going to print x is less than 10. And we're at the end of our loop, so we go back up. X is still equal to 9, still less than 10. So now we're going to print x is less than 10. All right, now we're going to go back. X is still 9, then that's less than 10. So now we're going to print x is less than 10. And you see how this keeps going and going because x never changes. So we actually never print out this line here saying the loop has ended. We're just going to get stuck in this loop here all day until we stop it. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Okay, last one. Don't be tricked. These are all trick questions. It's our last trick question. And my only hint is do not be tricked. Remember how string concatenation works. Tricky question, but all answers are welcome. So even if you're not sure, go ahead and put your answer in the chat. What do you think happens in this code? All right, that's perfectly fine. I also appreciate answers that say you're not sure. That means we can have a great discussion about it. Okay, we're not super sure about this one. That's all right. It's a question. It's a trick. Okay, so I'm gonna go at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. All right, let's just break this one out here. Let's just break this one out. All right. So first we've got word equals hello. Now backwards. This is where I tried to trick you here. We'll see how I tried to trick you. Backwards equals quote unquote. Now it says 4-letter in word. Okay, so I saw a couple comments about this saying letters not defined. But remember, when we were doing our for loops, this is not something that needs to be defined. It's defined within this. So it's saying for, this could be I, right? We've been seeing for I, but the name of some of the whatever your iterator is doesn't actually matter. So we can say for letter, we can say for character, we can say for dog, we can make that whatever we want. So in this case, we say 4-letter in word, and that is completely acceptable within a for loop. Now, if I had referenced letter somewhere else, like up here, that would not work because letter's not defined out here, but it is within our for loop. All right, we have some more guesses coming in now that we have that cleared up. All right, so now we have backwards equals letter plus backwards. This is where I'm tricking you. Some people got it right. That's great. All right. So it looks like I'm creating this variable called backwards. And based on what I've named the variables in my code, you would think that this would print hello backwards. You would think that because I named this variable backwards, but I just named it backwards. That may not actually work out. So let's see. So 4-letter in word. And remember when we have the for loop over a string, it's going to be over each character in the string. Okay, so over each character in the string. And remember we had this example where I said 4-letter in Miranda, and it printed out each letter in my name. Okay, so now we say 4-letter in word backwards equals letter plus backwards. So let's think about this. Let's pretend that we are a computer, and we're gonna, in these little comments here, we are gonna pretend we're a computer and we are building this with our brains. Okay, so first time we go for the loop. 4-letter in word, backwards equals letter plus backwards. Backwards. So I'm gonna use this to show what the value of backwards is. So that's letter. So first letter of hello plus, an empty string, which is equal to just H. All right, first time through the loop. So now this is what the value of backwards is. All right, 4-letter in word. So now we're on the next letter in word. Now backwards is going to be letter E plus H. No, letter plus backwards. Maybe I didn't actually trick you. Letter plus backwards. Yes, it is letter plus backwards. Yep, should be EH. Thank you. E plus H. Oh, so I didn't trick you. I thought I had another one where I named it backwards and then it actually didn't go backwards. But now that we're going through it, you can see that it's, I double tricked myself. I double tricked. Anyway, the order to look at is letter plus letter, right? So we just squish them together. And so now based on that pattern, the next part in hello is L, and then, so what should we not do? I'm not sure what that means. All right. And now we can see that this is going to print LEH. Oh, okay. The trick I was thinking of was that I think last year I did this and I named it backwards, but I didn't actually, I have it print backwards plus letter. And so it didn't actually switch it to be the backwards word. But then I think for this year, I changed it to actually print out backwards. So I was thinking of a trick that I actually didn't do. Yep, it's backwards. All right, so now our next letter is L, and the value of the previous backwards is LEH. So now we have LLEH, right? And so you can see how this is going. So now if we're going to print backwards, it should be Ole, hello backwards. All right, so let's just go through that one more time. So we have our word equals hello, backwards is an empty string. 4 letter in word. That's going to go over each character within our string. Print, or backwards, now equals letter plus backwards. So each letter in word, we're just going to add it on to backwards until we get backwards. So let's go ahead and run it and see what, oh, let me clear this. Run it and see, and sure enough, we get OLLEH, or hello backwards. So now, and since we, okay, so now, what I thought I had done to trick you, if we say backwards equals backwards plus letter, that is going to concatenate it the other direction, where we are starting with the empty string. So the first one, right, is empty string plus H, then H plus E, right? And then that just gives you hello. So that's what I thought I was tricking you with, but there was no trick. All right. So notice that the order does matter when you are concatenating strings. Yes, you can think of it as a character array if you are familiar with that. I'm not quite sure what you're, so every letter you put in the word hello is the same. I'm not really sure what you mean by that. So the reason it's going backwards is because we are starting with every letter in our word, and we iterate through that and add it on to the end. So it, or add it on to the front, which makes it turn backwards. All right. So if you ever get code like this and you think you know what it, I always encourage you to go through the code before you run anything, go through it and think about what should it do. This is a wonderful skill to have as a programmer. You need to be able to think like a computer. You need to be able to go through this code and think about what it does. And you don't get overwhelmed by, how many lines there are or how long it is. Just take it one line at a time. That's what a computer does, one line at a time. All right, and if you absolutely get stuck, then you can just run the code and see what happens. And then another tool that I always like to point people to is ChatGPT. I don't suggest you asking it to just write your homework for you, but I suggest that you ask it for explanations. If you're confused about this, for instance, that we just talked about, put it into ChatGPT, put the code into ChatGPT and ask it to explain it line by line. It will do it, and it does a marvelous job. ChatGPT can be a really great study tool if you use it right. Okay, if there's no questions, and we are going to move on from well, we're never going to fully move on from loops. Loops will always be in our heart, and actually your assignment does use loops. But we're also going to add something else to that called lists. Lists. I love lists. Oh, and this as well. I always like to include this. If you want extra practice, you're still a little stuck, or you just like extra study materials, go to this website. They have video lessons. They're very short. And they also have a couple multiple choice questions or sometimes coding questions. So great resource if you either want an extra challenge or you want some more practice. All right, lists. Let's talk about lists. So a list in Python is very much like a list that you might make by hand on a piece of paper. A list in Python is a specific data type. It is a list of values. And what a list allows us to do is to store a collection of data. And you can store, multiple values all in one variable. This is very helpful for us where there's maybe a situation where we have a lot of numbers to manage. I mean, think of a spreadsheet. You can't store a spreadsheet in Python, but you can store a list in Python. Have all those numbers together. So if you are into data science, which I am a data scientist, and you have some data, let's say I have data on, someone's heart rate over time. And what that looks like is, a number, and we just have a bunch of collections of numbers that all represent this person's heart rate at a different time. If we want to do some math with that, we don't want to create a billion variables called heart rate 1, heart rate 2, heart rate 3, heart rate 4. Instead, we put it all into a list called something like heart rates or data or whatever you want to name it. Put all of that into a list that's more easily accessible for us. We can do some analysis on that. And lists are a very good way to organize data within Python. So a list is its own data type. And in Python, it is denoted by open and closed brackets and comma separated. So imagine if you're writing out a list on paper, maybe you're writing a grocery list, you're saying eggs, comma, milk, comma, cereal, comma, something like that. Or don't do like a new line each time. Anyway, but in lists in Python are denoted by that open close bracket. Notice this is square bracket, not parentheses, and it'll look something like just like this. So 1, 2, 3. Let's look at that real quick. So let's say we assign it to a variable called myList. Just do open bracket and close bracket, and now whatever you want to put in that list. And you separate each value with a comma so that Python knows when you're talking about the first value and the second value, right? Because if we didn't separate these, it would get confused. All right, so 1, 2, 3. Now let's see what happens when we print my list. And that's exactly what it looks like. So this is a list in Python. Now let's print, remember the type function where we can check the data type of something? Class list. See, so a list is its own data type, and it is very useful. Of course, we can have multiple types of variables or data types within our list. So I had 1, 2, 3 here. But what if I wanted like I was saying, a grocery list, eggs, milk, butter, something like that. So now we have a list of strings, all separated by a comma. And now, similarly, you could have a mixture of data types. It doesn't all have to be the same data type. So let's say I have eggs 2.0, you know, true, cats. So whatever you want to throw inside of your list, as long as it's useful to you, whatever you want to throw inside of your list, you can. And that's one of the beauties of lists in Python, is that they don't have to be all numbers or all strings. You're able to store something like this. So let's say, when would you use this in the real world? Well, let's say we want to store, information about someone. So let's say we are a doctor's office and we want to store patient information very unsecurely, but just take this as a beginner's example of a list. So let's say patient information is Miranda. And let's say in the next one, I'm gonna put, age. That's not my real age, in case you didn't know. And, maybe illness or something. And now we have some patient information here with a name. We have some number. We don't really know what it is. Maybe that's my temperature. And then, what the symptoms are or something. So that's one way you may use a list. Okay. And the last thing that I want to point out is that lists are ordered. What this means is that the order matters. Just like order matters within a string. So, Miranda versus Adnirim, which is my name backwards, is different, right? Miranda and Admirim are different. The order matters. So my list 1, 2, 3 is different from 3, 2, 1. These are different lists. And if we want to check if two variables are the same or are different, then we can sorry, I got distracted. We've got some cool VR headsets going on. We can print, my list equal my other list. And that prints false. So they are not equal. The order does matter. Let's print it just to show you. And we can see that. All right. And a list. I keep looking at my list about lists. Lists can also contain duplicates. So you don't have to have just unique values in here. I can have 1, 2, 3, 2, 1 again, and then 3, 4, whatever. You can pretty much throw whatever you would like inside of the list. Print. So it does not have to be unique. The order does matter. And they can contain any sort of variable type. Two different ways to construct. You can use this list type, just like we can use int or string to convert something. You can use this list function to convert something to a list. But that's usually if you start out an empty list. You don't really need to worry about that, but I did want to tell you about it in case you were interested. But for this class, we'll just be creating lists like that. So we'll just be creating lists using our brackets here. So some example lists we have. My list is hello, comma, 5, comma, true. We have another list, dog, comma, cat. And these are all acceptable lists. And yes, you can. That's a great question. I just happened to see this in chat. Can we have a list with no data in it? You definitely can. Actually, if you do this line right here, new list equals list, open, close, has nothing in it. Create an empty list. Totally fine. Usually you will do that to start a list that you're eventually going to add data to. Good question. Can a list have a limit of how much data you put into it? Another great question. So kind of the opposite, the opposite end of the question. We can have an empty list. What about the far end of that list? That usually depends on your computer and on, Python software. So I don't know for sure what the memory capacity of a list is, but you'll never reach it in this class unless you try really hard, which maybe if you'd like to, that's fine. But for our purposes in this class, and actually in my entire career, I have never exceeded the memory capacity of a list. You'd have to put lots of stuff in there and have a computer with not a lot of RAM memory. Good questions. I love it. Okay, so let's talk about, so one thing with lists is, especially if they're very long, like we're talking about, is maybe you want to access a specific value from that list. Like maybe you want to say, what's the third item on my grocery store list? So how do we tell Python, I just want you to print the third item in a list, or I want you to print the last item in a list? How do we actually access those values if we wanted them by themselves? Well, this is talking about list indexing and list length. So let's talk about list length. Length of a list is how many items are in that list. It makes sense. That is in the name. So the length of a list of this one, hello and 5, is 2. There's 2 items in this list. So it's like someone asking, how many items are on your grocery list? And you can say, I have 5 items on my grocery list because there are 5 things that you've written down. Length of this list here, true, false. False, true is 4 because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 items in that. And you can actually get this length using a very, very helpful function called len. And you type len, and then in those parentheses, put the name of your list, and it will give you the length of it. So this example here, if we put fruits list, I'm trying to see if I put the answers on there. No, okay. Fruits list, apple, banana, cherry. And then if I print the length of fruits list, it's going to give me how many? 1, 2, 3. So the length of our list is 3. Let's try that out real quick. Fruits list equals, oops, don't forget your brackets. Apple, don't forget your commas. And now I can print the length of fruits list. This len function, we're just putting that right into our print statement. Okay, so now if we run this, 3. So the length of our list is 3. If we add something here, let's say orange, now the length of our list will be 4, right? Awesome. So now we know how to get the length of our list. The next is list indexing, which is what I mentioned earlier about accessing a specific part of the list. So we have length of the list, which tells us how long our list is, and then we have an index, which is the position of each item within the list. So it's its position. So your first, your second, your fifth in the list. It's kind of like if you have a line of people, and who's first in line, who's second in line, who's third in line, like that, but for our lists. One thing to note that will always and forever confuse beginners to Python is that Python has what is called 0 indexing. That means Python starts counting from 0. So the first item in a list has the index 0. I'm going to say that again. The first item in the list has the index 0. Python starts counting list indexes at 0. This makes some people very mad, usually mathematicians, makes computer scientists very happy. I'm just used to it at this point. So first item is position 0. Second item is position 1. Third item is position 2. If you're new to Python, this might frustrate you endlessly, but that's okay. We'll get through it together. So we can access an item in a list by its index, and here we're going to use brackets. So the syntax for this is the name of your list, then square brackets, and then the index number. So if we want the first item in my list, then we have my list, brackets, and inside those brackets put 0 because we want the 0th, the 0 position, or the first item in our list. Let's try that. Okay, so we've got our fruits list. Let's say we want to access the first value in fruits list. I'm going to say print fruits list bracket 0, because we start our index at 0. And that's going to print apple. What index do I need? The question for the class, what index do I need for cherry? What index goes here for cherry? Awesome, awesome. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Amazing. Thank you so much for those guesses. And everyone got it right. It's 2. And if you weren't sure about that, if you're like, I don't know what it is, remember we started 0. So this is 0 index, 1 index, 2 index. So if we want to print out cherry, then we access number 2. And if we wanted orange, then we would put in the index 3. Yeah, great job, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Okay. So similarly, if we had, fruits list again, this is the example I just did. If we print fruits list 1, remember we started 0, so that's 0, 1. So this is going to print banana. Okay, and then I thought maybe I had a note in there, but something quick I want to show you, a cool trick, a cool trick, is if you want to access, so if you want to access the first thing in the list, it's always 0, right? But let's say you're not sure, you just want to access the very last thing in the list. You don't care. You just say, I want the last item. You can say -1. So one cool thing about Python is that to access the very last item in a list, you can put -1 here. And that gets the last item, so orange. And let's say I get rid of orange, and then our list just ends at cherry. -1 will still get cherry for me. We'll get the last item in the list. So just a neat little tidbit to remember that if you just want the last item in a list, you can say -1. Looping over lists. I said we were done with loops. Oh no, we're not done with loops. Loops are always here in our hearts, like I said. So lists are very useful. I mean, yes, lists are very useful inside loops. Loops are very useful for processing items in a list. All right, let me try that again now that I know how to speak. Loops are very useful for processing items in a list. So here's my question here for you to put in the chat. Oops, don't show the answer. Hopefully you didn't see. Question for the chat. Which type of loop would be the most useful for iterating over a list? We've learned about 2 types of loops. Which loop is the best for iterating over items in a list? Amazing. And if you're still thinking about it, I got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yes. Yes, everyone putting their answers in the chat is correct. That's a for loop. Perfect, because when we are doing the definition of a for loop is to iterate over items within a collection. And if you go way back to when I was defining lists for you earlier, I said it's a collection or a series. So lists are really great in for loops, and actually we will use them frequently within for loops. So let's look at an example of using a for loop to iterate over a list. Let's say we want to print every item in our list. First, to create the list, my list equals hello, comma, world. And now it says for I in my list, print I. So this is going to go through each item inside of our list. Remember, it's comma separated, so anything before this comma, each item in our list and print it out. Oops. So let's go ahead and see how that works. All right. So I'm going to keep using this fruits list, and I'm going to say for I in fruits list, print I. And now this is going to go through, ooh, let me get rid of that so you can see. Goes through each item and prints it out. Apple, banana, and cherry. So that's just one of the most basic ways to use a for loop to iterate over a list. And maybe you're already seeing how this can be useful to us in some of our past assignments. Okay, let's look at this example. So we have num list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 number in num's list. Num squared equals num to the second power squared, and then print number squared. All right. So let's try this one here. Num's list equals 1, 2, don't forget your commas, 3, 4, 5. Is that what it was? Doesn't really matter. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now we're going to say 4. Remember, you can name this iterator, this part, we usually say for I in blank. You can say for num if you would like, for num in num's list. I'm going to say num squared equals num squared. Oops. And now print num squared. And I think that was the code on the slide here. Yep. So what this is going to do is go through each value in our nums list, square it, assign that to a new variable called num squared, and then print it. So think for a second what that's going to look like. All right, and run. And it's doing exactly what we want, printing the square of each number within our list. So 1, 4, 9, 16, 25. Great. Lists are so nice, and for loops are so compatible with them. I love it. Okay. Practice looping over lists. I think we did that. Okay, now let's talk about, we can have a list. A list is its own data. We know these things. A list is its own data type. A list can hold any data type. Can a list hold a list? Yes. Probably thinking, yes, Miranda, I know this because it's on your slides in front of me. And that is correct. We can have a list of lists. And what you're going to do is just use more brackets. So each list needs its own set of square brackets. All right. So you've got big list. And then if you have a list inside of it, also needs its own set of brackets. So list of lists is just going to be a bunch of lists in here. And then let's talk about length here, because we're talking about the length of a list. The length of a nested list is still just the number of items in the entire list, counting the list as one. So each list inside a list counts as one item. I'm going to show you this in code so that it makes more sense. So we have hello world, 7-Eleven, true, 8, and 1,000. All right. Now let's see. Okay. Can we name it something funny? Okay. So list of lists equals. Notice this list, hello, comma, world. All right. Now we're going to put a comma to add another list inside here, which was 7-Eleven, comma, 11, our favorite store. True, 8. And this last one is not a list, but that's okay. So now we've got our list of lists here. We've got the first item, which is the list hello world. We've got the second item, which is the list 7-Eleven. Third item, which is also a list. And then our fourth item is 1,000. So just to show you, let's say we print list of lists 0. This is going to print the first element, which is this list here. So if I clear this, hit run, notice how it prints the first element, so the entire thing, even if it's a list, right? Now let's print lists of lists at index 1, and that is 7-Eleven. So we can put lists inside of our lists, and maybe we will have an example later that I can come up with at some point to show when we would need this. It's very common within data science or when you're dealing with large amounts of information, large amounts of numbers all at once. But just know for now that this just counts as its own thing. And we can still use that indexing. So what if you want to access the index, the first index within this list here? Well, you can just use brackets just the same. So list of lists 1 is this list 711. And to access the first element within lists of lists at index 1, we can just put another bracket here and put 0. This is called nesting. Oh, why am I blurry? This is called nesting. Interesting. I don't know if I'm blurry to all of you, but suddenly my video is out of focus. Very strange. All right, I don't know how to fix that immediately, so we're not going to worry about it. So what I was saying though is that this list of list 1 is this list here, 711, and the first item within that is index 0. This is called nesting your brackets or nesting your lists. So we were able to retrieve the first item of that list of lists 1. Oh, weird. I don't know why I'm blurry. The focus on my camera just decided to, oh, I'm back. All right, I'm back. Okay, now let's talk about changing lists. So in Python and in computer science in general, we have a fancy term called mutable. Mutable. Think of mutant or mutate, which means to change. So if a variable is mutable, then it can be changed without having to reassign it or creating another variable. We haven't come across this property quite yet, but it will come up eventually. So what this means basically is that after you create a list, you can change it by index, or you can add to it or whatever you would like. And what this is going to do is just allow you to have if you're thinking of computer memory, then your list is, if you assign a list to a variable, it's within some variable. And then if you add to your list or you take a value away from your list, that's the same spot in memory. It's just changing it. So it's changing it in memory. And so your list object is still going to be the same variable, but you can change it. And if that went over your head, that's okay. I'm saying it for people who have maybe taken another programming language or something where you can't change lists after you create them. So we can look here at an example of reassigning a list value using its index. So let's say we've got our fruit list here, apple, banana, cherry, and then we say, okay, now I want to replace cherry with orange. So I say fruits list 2 equals orange. And now that actually lets us change it. So let's look at that example again. Apple, banana, cherry. And let's say I want to change that value, change the value at the index 2, or maybe you just want to change cherry to orange. You can say fruits list. What's the index of cherry? It's 0, 1, 2. Cherry is 2. Fruits list 2 now equals orange. And let's add some print statements. I'm going to print fruits list before we make that change, and then print fruits list after we make that change. Now when we run it, notice before we make the change, it's apple, banana, cherry. Now we can reassign. We can say, okay, replace this with orange. And we can say apple, banana, orange. So we can change our lists after we create them, which is pretty neat. Okay. Now there are a couple methods associated with lists that I'm going to talk about in these last couple minutes of class because they are very useful. So a method, another computer science term coming up, method. That is in this class, we can think of a method as a function associated with a specific object type, a specific data type. These are pre-built in Python. And you'll see this dot. You'll see like the name of a list and then a dot and then some name of a function. And this dot is telling us that we're using some pre-built function in Python that's only for lists. And the syntax of this, like I said, is variable name dot method name. And usually you may see these open and close parentheses. You don't always need to put something inside of them. And we can use these methods on any variable of a certain type or of a certain class. The list data type has a bunch of very useful methods. So if you want to read about them, you can look at them here. We're going to go over, I think 4 is what I have in here. We're going to go over the main ones that I use the most, that I see other people using the most. So it's called a method, and you access it with the name of your variable and then a dot. We're just going to learn about list methods today, which you can only use on variables that are of type list. All right, so let's look at them. So the first one is if you want to add an item to the end of your list. This is very useful. I use it all the time. Let's say in the real world, you're creating a grocery list. You say, I want eggs, I want milk, I want pretzels. And then you're like, oh, I forgot. I also want sour cream. And you can add sour cream to the end of your list. It's just like that, but in Python. So we're appending an item to the end of the list using the dot append method. And the syntax of this is list name dot append. And then in the parentheses, you're going to put the value that you want to add to your list. And like I said, this changes the list directly, so you don't need to use an equal sign to assign a new variable or anything. You can just do it directly on the list. So notice we use an equal sign to start our variable. We have fruits list equals banana, comma, apple, comma, cherry. And we say we want to add watermelon. So we can say fruits list dot append watermelon. That's how we're going to add something to our list. And now it has actually changed this fruits list. It's added the new string watermelon inside of our list. So let's try that. So we've already got our list here. We've already got our fruits list. Now let's say, okay, so I'm going to say print fruits list. Now we want to add an item to our list. Say fruits list dot append watermelon. Now, if we print fruits list, we should have hopefully added this new term. Now, if I run that, notice before we add it, we have apple, banana, cherry, and now we have apple, banana, cherry, watermelon. Amazing, amazing. So that's one example of append. You can do the same thing with dot remove. This is going to remove the term that you specify. So we have appended, we can add an item with append. We can also remove an item. Let's say now we want to remove banana. And then print our fruits list. So if you're coding along with me, first we appended watermelon, that adds it to the end. Now we're removing banana. And if we run that, you can see that we have gotten rid of the term banana. Now, what happens if we accidentally misspell banana and we end up with some word that's not in our list? Well, it's going to give us an error. And it says list. Remember, you can always read these error messages. list.remove X, X is not in list. So you need to make sure that you actually use this with something you know to be in the list to remove it. So we have append, we have remove, and we can do a couple other things like sort. I'm not going to go over these in the last couple minutes of class, but we have sort, which allows you to sort alphanumerically, which means numbers and letters only. So this will sort your list for you. So if we have banana, apple, cherry, then we sort it. It's going to sort it, I think, in alphabetical order. So then it's going to be apple, but banana, cherry. And you can add, this is called a flag or an argument. Notice we didn't put anything inside of these parentheses like we've been doing with append or remove. You put a value inside. And this one, we don't put a value inside because we're just sorting it. There's no value for it to accept. But you can add reverse equals true. I'm going to ask you, what do you think that does? Reverse equals true. Well, that's going to put it in reverse alphabetical order. So we're not going to go over these in detail. We may touch on them next time, but I think that is most of what I want to cover. You can also just reverse a list's order. This is not the same as sort reverse. This is reversing the actual order of the list that you have, switching it around. Okay, and then some reviews. Okay, so I think I'm going to stop there. We will go over in more detail how we can use the sort method and the reverse method next time. But for now, I encourage you to play around with these, play around with the methods that I have shown you here. And your homework is just going to be about, your homework is just going to need I'm going to give you a hint for your homework. You just need the append method for your homework. So just look at that one. But let's, I just introduced these list methods right at the end of class. In my experience, the only ones I ever use are append and remove. I rarely use sort or reverse or all of the other ones. Python has many, many methods. But most of the time I'm just using append and remove. So that's why I chose to spend the most time on those. But you're not expected to remember them all. I would say if you remember one, remember append. Remember how to add an item to a list. And like I said, Google is your friend. So if you want to look at all of the list methods available to you and practice all of them, then you can. I have a link here that you can go to. But otherwise, we're mostly in this class going to worry about append. So this leads me to your homework for next time. You're going to create an adding machine. This is going to combine a lot of concepts that we have learned about so far. So create a program that asks a user to enter a number. Hopefully you're thinking about what function you use to ask a user. Use a loop to continue asking the user for that number until they enter a certain letter, like Q, and then you're going to print out the sum of your numbers. I'm going to put in here, store the numbers in a list as a hint. Okay, so that is your assignment for next week. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. After this class, we only have 2 more classes left. How crazy. So I'm looking forward to wrapping up the class with you in our penultimate class next week. Let me know. Feel free to stay on for a couple extra minutes if you have questions. But here's your assignment for the week. And if you don't have any questions, then I'll just see you next week. Great to see everyone. I'm going to look at the questions in the chat as well now that I have some time. Let me stop the recording.